Today we are going to study Surah Luqman. The verses 12 to 15 will be under our study. These verses actually form part of the advice that was given to Luqman the Sage to his son when he was leaving his own position as the head of the tribe and transferring the reins to his son. And the Arabs actually revered him, they respected him, and the reason that his advice is cited here in this surah, which is actually named after him, the Surah Luqman, is that he presented the same message of monotheism and all other precepts which Islam stands for, and it stood for when Prophet Muhammad arrived. So it was like telling him or telling the idolaters of Mecca that the very Sage Luqman, who they looked up to, also brought the same message with him of Tawheed. He preached Tawheed, he taught Tawheed, and at the instance that he was handing over the leadership of his tribe to his son, he said these words which we are going to study. So it goes off like this: Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. We have we gave precisely this wisdom to Luqman also and directed, be grateful to God, and he who is grateful will be grateful for his own self, and he who is ungrateful, God does not care about him because God is self-sufficient. He has praiseworthy attributes. So the first thing which the Quran mentions here is that Luqman had a lot of wisdom in him. He was a sagacious leader. He had this knack of transferring the wisdom that he had to the younger generation, especially to his son, and that is what he has profoundly made use of here. And the first thing that he has said is that Anishkur Lillah, that the first thing that you have to understand is to thank God, because it is God who stands at the source of all the blessings that we have. And a person who actually thanks God, it is not that he is doing any favor to God. It is actually the fact that he is acknowledging the truth. And God does not need this gratitude. Because if a person does not thank him, as the verse says, God is self-sufficient, he himself, the person who is not thanking God, he himself is wronging his own soul, and he is letting himself down. So, in order to express gratitude to the Almighty, the first thing, as said by Luqman, it just serves this purpose to say that not only this gratitude has to be expressed through words, but through deeds as well. And this is precisely what Luqman meant, that when you are taking over the position of leadership of this tribe, remember, start off by thanking God for this favor that he has given you. You are now in charge of this tribe, and this is nothing less than a favor of God. And for this favor, you must thank him, and not only thank him through your own words, but by being a just leader of the tribe and at the same time administering justice between his people. The next thing which is mentioned is وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانَ لِإِبْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. The necessary requisite of this is that none should be associated with God. Recall when Luqman, while counseling his son, had said, Son, do not associate partners with God. In reality, polytheism is a great injustice. So, again, as this has been said earlier on as well, that the primary wrong that one can commit against the Almighty is to associate partners with him. And this is precisely what Luqman conveyed to his son. And he said that, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah, oh my son, do not associate partners with God, because as far as polytheism is concerned, as far as associating partners is concerned, this is a big wrong. It is a big injustice. And why does the Quran call shirk or polytheism as a big injustice, zulmun azim? It is because the person has no argument in favor of polytheism. It's a self-invented creed. And the Almighty has said at a number of occasions in the Quran that had he chosen partners for himself, he would have been the first person to convey this to his creation, to his creatures, but he did not do so. And only he could have known whether he has partners or not. And in the absence of any such information from him, how can his creatures associate partners with him about which they have no knowledge? This is like inventing a falsehood against God. And precisely that is why the Quran calls it to be iftara Allah, which means to impute falsehood to God. You are doing something out of your own whims. There is no logical reason behind it. And when there is no logical reason behind it, and it is being done by human beings out of their own accord, then it is the biggest injustice that can take place on the surface of the earth. And at another instance, the Almighty has said that people who do uh, polytheism, who indulge in polytheism, and they deliberately do so, then they shall never be forgiven in the hereafter. They shall suffer eternal hell, eternal damnation. But again, the Quran has made it clear that we have to understand that there is a difference between committing an act of polytheism and becoming polytheists themselves. So, to commit an act of polytheism would be the same as what perhaps the Christians of the times of the Prophet and even today they do, and that is they regard Jesus to be the Son of God. Now, this is a grave act of polytheism, but this does not make them polytheists because, as we know from the Quran, a person becomes a polytheist or any by if he wants any other title for himself when he admits to it. Christians, they never admitted to polytheism. Yes, they have committed certain things which certainly fall in the ambit of polytheism, but because they try to interpret it as a form of monotheism, which of course the Quran does not accept, but because they keep on trying and they say that we are monotheists, but they stumble upon these new ideas in which they actually lead themselves to polytheism. So the Quran has not called them polytheists in any way. It is only the idolaters of Mecca who are called polytheists or al-mushrikun by the Quran because they themselves claim that we believe in more than one God. But this is not the view of the Christians. So what we can say is that they are deviant monotheists, but we cannot call them polytheists. And precisely for this reason, in the whole of the Quran, never ever has the Quran called the Christians, despite the fact that they regard Jesus to be the Son of God, as polytheists. Because, as I said earlier on, they think that this is monotheism and they try to explain it in the form of a monotheistic creed. And this is something that we have to accept and understand that unless people profess to a certain creed themselves, we are no ones to call them otherwise. And then continuing with his counsel and his advice, uh, he has said, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. There is no doubt we have counseled a human being about his parents also. His mother kept him in her womb, tolerating woe after woe, and after birth it took 2 years for his weaning. So and then it says, we have counseled him, be grateful to me and to your parents, and remember that ultimately to me is the return. So this is like a sentence being added to the advice of Luqman, and this often happens in the Quran when a discourse reaches a certain stage and someone is speaking. God adds his own speech at times in order to make it more emphatic and to add more stress to it. And the words this time are that the Almighty has said that we have counseled a person regarding his parents. And the parents, of course, when they speak of the parents, the first thing which is mentioned here in this verse is the mother, because it is the mother who bears a child and she keeps him or the child in the womb, and for that she has to suffer also. So therefore the Quran says that this is something that you have to realize, that this childbearing age, once you pass through it, and then of course the breastfeeding which the mother does, if you add those periods, then it comes out to be 2 years. For 2 years she's nursing you in some form or the other, either within her body or outside her body. So this nursing is something which adds more rights for her than the father himself. So therefore it is said in certain narratives as well that a mother has thrice the right than a father, precisely because of the reason that it was the mother who bears a child in her womb, and then it is she who deliver the child, which of course is a big pain that she suffers. And finally, nursing the child through her breastfeeding is also something that she does alone. So these are three things which are distinct to the mother, and that is precisely why God Almighty has given her thrice the right of a father. So this is how the Quran has said that first thing that you have to do is to thank God Almighty for His favors, and the very next thing is anishkur li wali waliday. So God says that you have to thank me and your parents, because yes, I provided you with your parents, I provide you with all sorts of blessings, but don't forget that the biggest blessing that you might have after myself is your parents, and you have to thank your parents for all what they have done for you and they are continuing to do for you. And parents are all, we all know that they cannot be, I mean, we cannot just thank them enough. What they have done for us in our childhood is cannot be paid back in any way. So the best way to show this gratitude is to be kind to them. And this is what other at other instances it is mentioned that you have to be very kind to your parents. And then it says, وَإِن جَاهَدَكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيَّ ثُمَّ إِلَيَّ مَرْجِعُكُمْ فَأُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. But if they force you to associate someone with me, which you have no proof, do not obey them. However, treat them kindly in this world and follow the way of those who turn to me. Then you will have to return to me alone. Then I shall inform you of what you have been doing. So now the next step here, which is mentioned, of course, which is also peculiar to what did happen in the times of the Prophet, that the children would at times convert, but the parents would still be idolaters. So about them, about such a specific situation, the Quran says that if they force you to associate partners with me, so in that case, you have to just not pay heed to them, because this is something that is superior, and the obedience to God is much superior and has more say than obeying parents in any respect. So if they force children to do something which is irreligious for that matter, the Quran says that you should not follow their advice, you should not obey them in any way. But it says one thing which is very important, and it is in fact no less than an eye opener, and that is wasahibhuma fid dunya ma'rufa. That in spite of the fact that they might be calling you towards evil creeds, or they might be calling you towards polytheism, yes, you are at liberty to not follow their advice in such a case, but you have to be extremely polite and kind to them. Sahibhuma fid dunya ma'rufa means that you must be very, very kindly to them in this world, very sympathetic, not rude at all. And we also know, dear viewers, that polytheism is something which the Almighty does not like. He abhors, and I've just said that He has elsewhere stated in the Quran that He can forgive everything except deliberate polytheism. But if the parents themselves are polytheists, such is their status, such is their respect that God has made them command, is that even then, yes, you must not follow their ways, but you cannot be disrespectful to them. And this is something which is a hallmark of the Quran, that in spite of the fact that God does not like polytheism, but if the parents are polytheistic, He does not say that you be harsh to them or you treat them in an unkind way. You have to be extremely kind to them. Another thing that you might want to know, which is of course found in certain other instances in the Quran regarding parental guidance, is that you'll not find any way in any of the verses of the Quran to be of the fact that you have to obey parents in regarding the decision that they make for you. What we have seen from the Quran and what you will find when you study the Quran in detail is that everywhere the Quran says "Wabil walidaini ihsana," you treat your parents with kindness. So to treat them with kindness, of course, refers to the fact that you behave with them in a way that is very becoming of you. It should be very befitting, and in no way should you be impolite. And one important thing here is that because we often look after our parents through a lot of gadgets or maybe hiring people to look after them. But remember, one of the greatest needs which parents have is that emotional support. And that emotional support can only be provided to old parents if as children they find time to spend some part of the day with them as much as possible. Because without this emotional support, whatever gadgets and whatever other support the children can provide them, yes, it can make their life comfortable, but that assurance of the heart, that comfort which they can only receive when their children give sufficient time to them, that has no parallel, that has no match. And so, therefore, this is one thing which the Quran does tell us, that if you have to be kind to your parent, and this kindness must be paid with kindness, and that is by giving your time, by giving emotional support, especially when they are sick or maybe they have grown old. So, with this, we come to an end to today's study on these Quranic verses, and we will now open our mic for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for the guidance and explanation of the verses. Our first question is going to come from Rija Sheikh. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you so much for such an enlightening session. My question pertains to the respect that parents have been, the status that they've been rewarded in, the Quran. And I understand that the parallel drawn is for Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam, that, regardless of what happened, he was always that the whole story, I realized that, that's the extent of what a father can do, but you still have to be kind. However, now that in today's world, when we're so aware of, narcissistic tendencies and parents deliberately at times harming children, in that scenario, is it safe to distance yourself from your parent, or does the Quran still say that you should try till you can?
So yes, this is a very exceptional circumstance. Normally, this doesn't happen the way you have described, but yes, there are instances in which parents, they become very autocratic, and not only autocratic, but they inflict harm on their children, and the harm goes very far. And I can describe without any I would say qualms regarding any disqualification, that there is this extreme instance of incest which does occur, which of course is something that even brings goosebumps and shudders, makes us shudder. But the fact is that yes, if they go to such an extreme that they cause such harm to their children, then yes, the children may have this right to distance themselves. But at the same time, this distancing should be in a very, very political way, which means that, well, if you come across them at some instance, then at least you should not cut off the ties completely. Maybe just keep some working relationship, which means that if you come across them, if you meet them, if they come to meet you, you go to them. A simple greeting should be enough. But yes, this harm is so much that it is extremely difficult for any child to have any reconciliation in this matter. And if they distance themselves from their parents in such a situation, then they might have a justification for that.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia, you may ask your question now.
Dr. Shah, pardon me, just one question about your zakat. If you can just clarify. You said jewelry is exempted, and it includes if it's with stones or gems, exempted from zakat.
Right. So any jewelry that you are going to use for your own self, whether you use it sparingly or you use it consistently, or maybe you just have put it up in the bank for your own children to use them, all that is exempted from zakat. Only that jewelry is zakatable which is kept for as a means of investment, like for example a gold brick or any other a form of jewelry which is not meant for use. But the purpose of that jewelry is that whenever it gets expensive, you'll just sell it off and maybe buy a new set of jewelry. So basically, only invest for the jewelry which is meant for investment purposes is zakatable, whether it's diamond, whether it's gold, whether it's platinum, or any other metal.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have a follow-up question related to that. So my mother had some jewelry from when she got married, and she distributed that jewelry between me and my brother's wife. So, but she has been giving zakat of all of the jewelry since many years. So she did the right thing, or she didn't have to do that?
I mean, she didn't have to do that because she did what she was told. In our part of the globe, the subcontinent, the Hanafite fiqh is in vogue. So according to the Hanafis, you need to pay zakat for the jewelry you are using sparingly or not using it. Consistently. So they have their own ruling in this regard, and we don't find any support for this in the Sunnah of the Prophet. So the Sunnah of the Prophet in this regard is that all items of personal consumption, can include things as assets like cars and houses, or as small as clothes and of course other things that you have. So all items of personal consumption are exempted. So what
Thank
the
you.
Hanafites do, they think that gold is something which is not an item of personal consumption, and hence they regard gold to be zakatable. But we find no reason to create this exception for gold. So just as people have gadgets and other things for personal consumption, jewelry cannot be made an exception. Jewelry too is a item of personal consumption, which means personal use.
All right, thank you. Okay, next we have Ibad Ajmal. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. I just wanted to ask you, is Surah in there? We talked about um, Luqman and the wisdom that he had. So I just wanted to ask, कि किस तरह का wisdom है that God wants us to have in this dunya? I know एक wisdom है of the book, but in this surah we also learned the relationship between a father and son, the relationship between a man and his parents. So what is the best kind of wisdom that a person can,
So, I mean, here
during
the
that
wisdom
time?
is very specific. The verse says that we taught Luqman this wisdom. And what was that? Be grateful to God. So, wisdom in its general sense has a lot of connotations, but here in this particular context, the wisdom that Luqman taught his son was that wisdom is going to be reflected if you show gratitude to God. So, here it has a very specific meaning.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia has some clarification she needs for related to the previous question, so you may briefly ask it so we can go with other participants.
Dr. Shehzad, you described all the attributes of Allah beautifully. My question is it only in our part of the world or our society? I have seen parents beat up their children if they don't pray. I have seen mothers tell their little child, if you don't clean the food on your plate, Allah will punish you. In everything, it is like we made Allah into a dictator who's sitting there ready to hit you with a stick. How would you explain this? It is disturbing and sometimes terrifying what we do to our kids.
I think it has got much to do with the patriarchal traditions that we have and the tribal culture whose remnants still exist in our society. And it has nothing to do with religion. And unfortunately, because religion is at times used as a tool for this, that we think that religion actually condones it, whereas that does not condone it at all. So, this strict parents, the way they deal with their children, they become autocratic, they become revengeful, and they use methods to train their children which we cannot even imagine. So this is something which is against human rights. This is against the rights of children. And Islam, they should not find any support with Islam for this. And they need to be educated, and they need to be told that they are dealing with living beings, and they are not dealing with things which can be called robots, or which are at their own sweet disposal. So this is just a question of a new culture that should be developed by the younger parents that are now coming to the fore, that as parents, they must not treat their children the same way, perhaps, that they themselves were treated by their parents.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Salman Aziz, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I just want to have the clarification about the 2 years of the mother feed time, sir. Does it include the time of the family way? And what
Yes,
does God
it does.
describing here? It is generic, sir, that it happens in the world, or Allah Almighty is giving us some law that we have to go for about 2 years. Sir.
Well, actually, it's like a advice, I would say, that hamalathu ummuhu, the words are wahnan ala wahnan wa fisaluhu fi amain. So basically, the amain is for that period of suckling, which is mentioned here. because generally children are suckled for this, and this is the period which is the maximum period in normal circumstances. And so the Quran has just pointed out to a tradition that already existed in the Arab society, that generally children are weaned after 2 years.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Shahid Tamim, please ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab.
Walaikum
This is
assalam.
with regard to zakat on mutual funds and shares if we hold the holding period and what we call quantum of zakat. Is it 2.5 or lesser than that?
So there are two points of view in this regard. So let me give you an example from the shares. So you will give the zakat at the rate of 2.5% of the current market value of the share whenever the date arrives for your zakat disbursement. This is one formula. And the other, which is also proffered by some authorities, is that whenever you get the dividend, you will pay 10% of the dividend for zakat. You will not pay any amount on the head or the principal amount, zakat, not on the principal amount, but on the dividend. So either you can follow either of these two. So you either pay 2.5% of the principal amount of the current market value at the date of your zakat, or you can pay 10% every time that you get the dividend. So 10% of the dividend.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Shehzad.
सर मेरा सवाल था कि मुशरिकीन अरब जो शिरक किया करते थे वो वाला शिरक और आज का शिरक जो हिंदूज में है इनमें क्या फर्क है बुनियादी तौर पे?
कोई बहुत ज़्यादा फ़र्क नहीं है। यानी हिंदूज़ जो हैं वो भी इसी किस्म का शिरक करते हैं। उनके यहाँ भी विष्णु और ब्रह्मा, उनके यहाँ भी त्रिमूर्ति का कॉन्सेप्ट है। यानी उनके यहाँ 3 खुदा हैं, उसके बाद उनके बहुत सारे उसके छोटे भी खुदा हैं और वो उनको अलग-अलग हैसियत देते हैं। लेकिन असल वो जो ब्रह्मा ही को मानते हैं, या आप समझ लीजिए जो इसको ईश्वर कहते हैं या भगवान कहते हैं, ये असल में खुदा एक है, बाकी जो हैं वो दो, यानी उनके वो भी गॉड हेड्स हैं, यानी वो भी हैसियत रखते हैं और वो उनके पार्टनर्स हैं, लेकिन एक हेड गॉड है, एक असल है जिसको वो ईश्वर कहते हैं या भगवान कहते हैं। तो इसी तरह से मुशरिकीन अरब भी यही रखते थे, वो अल्लाह को सबसे बड़ा खुदा मानते थे और इसके अलावा जितनी भी और खुदा थे वो कहते थे ये इनके शरीक हैं, और वो फरिश्तों को खुदा की बेटियां मानते थे और वो ये कहते थे कि ये भी इनकी भी हैसियत इसी की है कि हम अपने ख्वाहिशात को इन फरिश्तों की से कुर्ब हासिल करके मनवा सकते हैं खुदा से। तो नौयत फ़र्क है यानी जो जिनको एसोसिएट करते थे, वरना अपनी जो रूह में ये एक ही है।
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Bahram, you're next.
Alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is about when we are and have discussions with our parents about religion. They are Muslims, they are not polytheists, but they follow, for example, a different sect or different form of religion. And you get these discussions about religion. Are we allowed to, if we have different opinions, that we are still not listening to them, but still treating them with kindness, but to a certain level, because we don't think they are right in the religion opinion?
So even in such a case, I mean, the Quran has given us this guideline that whatever religion that they follow, if it is a different religion, you don't need to follow them in following their religion. But in all circumstances, you have to treat them with respect, with kindness, and with sympathy. You must not be rude to them. So that human relationship of kindness must always remain, regardless of what faith they might have or what creed that they might follow.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
Shehzad.
much.
Rabia Jamil, please ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. So I want to ask a question about the term Al-Furqan. Allah mentions Quran as the book which separates right from the wrong, and that's why it is called Furqan. So the question in my mind is, so where does the objective morality lies then? Because it becomes so confusing for me. Like, how does this claim prove to be right of Quran, that it is Al Furqan which separates right from wrong? Because when we study religions, we find that there is no such thing like objective morality. Like, there are so many things like
Right.
slavery, murder,
I
and
understand. So you see,
can
you
you
have to. I get your question. You see, when the Quran says that it is Furqan, it refers to religious aspects In all religious aspects, it is the decisive word. Objective morality or morality in itself is something which the Quran has said is found in every person, and it has outlined that in Surah Nahl when it says, "In Allah ya'murukum." In Allah, the words which the Quran actually says is that there are three virtues and there are three positive virtues, three negative virtues. So, Yamru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i zil qurba. So, the three positive virtues are mentioned as adl, ihsan, and ita'i zil qurba. And the three negative ones are fahsha, and munkar, and al-baghi, which means nudity or lewd things, or which are evil and which are in any way belong to wrongful rebellion. So this is the Quranic concept of basic morality. You can call it objective morality, you can call it whatever you like. So the Quran actually makes this distinction that basic morality is ingrained. And for that, the Quran does not need to be the Furqan, because that is a universally acceptable thing to all humankind. Furqan only comes into, it comes into play regarding all religious concepts. So basic morality is something which is already agreed upon. And as far as Furqan is concerned, it regards itself with the distinguisher between good and evil regarding concepts of religion. Whereas basic morality is something, as I said, which is already agreed upon. And it should not be confused with objective morality, because this is a new term. And for objective morality, we have a different set of parameters. So the Quranic term is either Furqan, which we know, which you just described, and the other is basic morality and not objective morality.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Ahmed, you may ask your question now.
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि जो आपने पॉलीथीज्म का स्टार्टिंग में अकीदा बताया, तो या फिर जो मुशरिकाना अकायद हैं हिंदुओं के, तो वो काफ़ी सिमिलैरिटी शेयर करते हैं जो मुसलमानों का वहदतुल वजूद का अकीदा है। तो क्या वजह है कि हम हिंदुओं के शिर्क को जो है वो मुशरिक डिक्लेयर करते हैं और यहाँ पर मुसलमानों को गुंजाइश देते हैं?
तो उसकी वजह ये है कि जो हिंदू हैं वो अपने आप को इसका कायल कहते हैं कि हाँ, हम एक से ज़्यादा खुदाओं को मानते हैं। लेकिन जो वहदतुल वजूद के लोग हैं वो ये नहीं कहते, वो कहते हैं हम एक ही खुदा को मानते हैं, वो उसकी तौजीह और तावील करते हैं। ये ऐसी है कि जैसे हज़रत मसीह को खुदा का बेटा मानने के बावजूद वो कहते हैं कि हम तो शिर्क नहीं कर रहे और हम तो तौहीद परस्त हैं। तो जो अपने आप को तौहीद परस्त कहेगा और इसके बावजूद शिर्क में मुब्तला होगा, उसको हम ये कह सकते हैं कि बिगड़ा हुआ तौहीद परस्त है, लेकिन उसको हम मुशरिक नहीं कह सकते। जबकि हिंदू जो हैं वो तो इसका इकरार करते हैं कि हम एक से ज़्यादा खुदा मान रहे हैं, लेकिन वहदतुल वजूद वाले जो लोग हैं वो इसका इकरार नहीं करते। आप उनसे बहस कर लें, वो कहते हैं हम तो एक खुदा को मानते हैं।
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have had this question from someone I've been holding since the first day, which is, what does it mean to have a connection with God, and how can I assess my strength of connection with God?
Well, actually, it depends on what you mean by that connection. Connection has various facets. So basically, you feel that inner strength in your own self, in which you are able to, if you have a choice between doing right and wrong, if your percentage of doing right is, in my mind, is more than 50%, and you are more inclined towards doing goodness, that would mean that that God connection that you have with Him, which is a persistent thing, is always positively impacting you in a way that connection was there for you. And that connection, of course, is something that arose in the first place through your connection with Him through the Quran, by offering praise to Him, by showing your gratitude to Him, by remembering Him. So these are vehicles of connecting with Him, or these are means of connecting with Him. And through these means, if you want to assess whether your connection was strong enough or not, then that is how you would assess yourself, that when the choice between good and evil comes your way, how much do you find yourself inclined towards curbing that evil in your own self and going more towards good. If the percentage is more than the negative percentage, that would mean that the connection that you had with God through these various means, like praying and showing gratitude and reading the Quran and following the Quran, that means that those means had a positive impact, because they were now instrumental in impacting you in taking the decision towards or in favor of what is right, in more proportion than the reverse.
Thank you. But for people who are not Muslims, and maybe they don't believe in God, or maybe they're atheist, but they they do good things too, and some of them are very inclined towards positive and bringing positive things into society. So what does that mean?
So that
Then
means that the inner goodness which every person has, that is working. So you see, when you are connected to God, the percentage of doing good has a deeper impact, I would say, than the percentage of doing good when you're not connected with Him. And when I speak of this connection, you see, there are things which a person might succumb to, and which to a person who is a non-believer might not have that importance. Whereas for a believer, the things such as, for example, the lust for sex, or the means to satisfy a sexual urge. This is one area in which a person might take a different path, who doesn't have that strong God connection, or the connection that a believer might have, uh, in relation to the person who would do good things, like he might be honest, he might be upright in his worldly dealings. But for example, in such situations where one's carnal desires are involved, he would find it okay to indulge in out of marriage sexual relations, or something like similar to them. So you see, it depends on the nature of that connectivity, how it's going to impact you. But as far as those basic goods, basic element of being good is concerned, that can arise because of the fact that that inner good, or that satisfaction that you get by doing good, is something which really eggs you on.
thank you so much. This is it for today. And thank you, Dr. Shehzad, and thank you all the guests for joining and participating. We will inshallah see you tomorrow.
Inshallah.